did not investigate Trump during the 4 years he was president, even though he kept committing crimes. And for 2 full years after he left office, they didn't investigate him because of all the dead enders left over, and Chris Wray is still running the FBI. But now Trump knows that that wasn't enough. He still lost the 2020 election and had to leave office. So he's asking himself, what do I do this time in order to make sure? Well, it turns out that the one thing that stopped Trump on January 6th from declaring a national state of emergency, he actually had an executive order doing this, ordering the military to seize voting machines. And the one thing that stopped him was General Mark Milley, was the military, the Pentagon. The Pentagon said, we will not go along with this. You can call up the military and tell us to go get these voting machines, but it's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, and we are not going to do it. So Trump has pretty much said out loud, I mean, just 6 months ago, he called again for firing Mark Milley. He has pretty much said out loud that if he becomes president, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to fire all the heads of the military. He'll fire the head of the Marine Corps, he'll fire the head of the Army, he'll fire the head of the Navy, he'll fire the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of them, and replace them all with sycophants, with toadies, with Steve Bannon and Kash Patel type people. And I think that, you know, he'll do it. I really do. And I don't think that this is something unique to Trump. I think that any of these MAGA Republicans would probably do the same thing because they're all committed to ending democracy in America and replacing it with strongman fascism. So what do we do? Well, number one, Congress needs to strengthen the Posse Comitatus Act. Number two, it needs to deal with the emergency powers of the president. Number three, one of the ways that Trump so badly corrupted things, and he did this with his Secretary of Defense, and he did this, you know, Chris, what was Chris's last name? Chris Miller and his assistant, Kash Patel. He did this with, you know, a whole bunch of figures was to make them acting, right? Alexander Hamilton pointed out in Federalist something or other, I forget the number, that the whole point of Senate confirmation was to keep out people of low character, basically, to prevent a president from putting lousy people into office. He says it would, Senate confirmation provides, quote, this is Federalist 76, an excellent check upon the spirit of favoritism in the president and would tend greatly to prevent the appointment of unfit characters. So the Senate needs to change the 1998 Vacancies Act to say that you can no longer do acting people in cabinet positions and positions that require Senate confirmation. You've got to have Senate confirmation. These things would Trump-proof the government. And frankly, I realize the Republicans control the House of Representatives, but there have to be at least 5 or 6 Republicans, or 7 or 8 or 9 Republicans in the House of Representatives who would go along with the Democrats on these things. These, I mean, we got to pull this fascist MAGA weed out. And, but in the meantime, we've got to harden our country's defense against it. What say you? In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though. She wrote, "Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon." Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Wednesday. A lot going on in the world to talk about today. You and me for all 3 hours. Let's see what's up. First off, the Maga Russian plan to track and control your life. This is grim stuff. Excuse me. Also, climate change is melting down America. We need to nationalize the poison that's killing our planet. And should Leslie Van Houten of the Charles Manson murders have been released from prison today or this week? I'll share my thoughts on that and collect yours as we go through the program. In the second hour of our program today, regardless of where COVID came from, Trump is culpable and unnecessarily killed at least 500,000 Americans, at least. Republicans are trying to push back. It's rather humorous. We'll get into that in the second hour. Also in the second hour, Republicans are battling with Maga for control of the party, and this battle is breaking out into the open. I'll tell you about that. And a crazy alert. Why is Tucker doing a 2.5-hour interview with an alleged sex trafficker man, a fraudster who brags about abusing women? In the third hour of our program, inflation goes down. It hit a record low, or a new low, a recent low here today. Excuse me. Should Leslie Van... I mentioned Leslie Van Houten already, I guess. Is Biden quietly reversing Trump's sabotage of Obamacare? And why is Erdogan dealing major blows to Putin? We'll get into that in the third hour of the program. Assuming that I don't sneeze here. Every now and then, you know, the allergies are there, I guess. Anyhow, my rant for today, my daily take over at HartmannReport.com, is titled "The Maga Russian Plan to Track and Control Your Life." And I call it that because basically what it appears to me is that the MAGA Republicans, the Trump Republicans, are absolutely imitating Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban. And they're quite aggressive about it and quite enthusiastic about it and quite proud of it. Marjorie Taylor Greene just a few weeks ago tweeted out, "Today I filed 6 amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act to prohibit sending any additional funding, weapons, ammunition, or other resources to Ukraine." Yes, we love Russia, right? Says Marjorie Taylor Greene. Donald Trump lavished praise on Putin over and over and over again. Conservative podcaster said, "I stand on the side of Russia right now." And then when the Times reached out to him and said, "You know, we're going to publish this. Do you have anything to say?" He said, "People support Russia because you did not do the right thing when it came to the fraud and corruption of Biden." Right. He says, "I pray for the people in Ukraine, but equally pray the people who facilitated the evil communist agenda in the U.S. are held accountable." Right. The evil communist agenda in the U.S. You know, when the NRA was busted by the staff of the Senate Finance Committee for laundering Russian money into the 2016 Trump campaign and facilitating the efforts of Russian spy Maria Butina, the Republican Party officially replied that this report from the Senate staff was, quote, overblown. No droids in this car, right? It's really hard to find MAGA Republicans who will criticize Putin and the way he's running Russia. I mean, it really is. So that, I think, should cause us to consider what might America be like if a MAGA Republican becomes president, and if MAGA Republicans, and I'm saying MAGA Republicans because I think it's important generally. I think it's important for you and me, and I think it's also important for the Democratic Party to distinguish between MAGA Republicans and let's say, Mitch McConnell Republicans or Mitt Romney Republicans, who I disagree with on just about every issue on earth, but who at least have some loyalty to democracy. I say some because they're still enthusiastic about voter suppression and packing courts. And I mean, they're not all in on democracy, but at least they're not all in on fascism. So, what do we have? Well, a couple of months ago, the Associated Press did a story about the life of a young woman, a Russian journalist who's been arrested twice for showing up at demonstrations as a reporter. And now every time she gets on the Russian subway, she gets stopped by the police and detained for hours because she is now in the facial recognition database for Russia. Like America, Russia has doorbell cameras, they have security cameras, they have traffic cameras pretty much everywhere. And like America, most of those cameras are on the internet. The difference is that in Russia, they all funnel into the Russian government, whereas in America, they funnel into private corporations who can sell our information to the government, but so far the government has not used it in a nefarious fashion, but the capability is there. And I think that's an important thing to note, is that capability is there. And, if we get a Maga Republican, I mean, again, in Russia, in just the last year, over 600,000 websites were taken down on the in Russia, blocked nationwide. And nearly 800 people face criminal prosecutions for things they said or liked online or on social media. Earlier this year, the Kremlin and its media regulator rolled out an AI system to run facial recognition at blinding speed and simultaneously looking for forbidden words or phrases on social media, on websites, in publications, in email. Cell phone providers in Russia are required to actually record conversations and store those recordings in case the government wants to access them. This year, Russia announced that they're going to follow China, Saudi Arabia, and other dictatorial regimes in basically closing the internet, having what Putin refers to as a sovereign internet. And meanwhile, the culture wars are rolling along at full speed in Russia. In 2021, Putin announced a program to cut the number of abortions in half. Criminalization of abortion is moving through the Duma. Moscow, most recently, made spreading LGBT propaganda a crime, be it online or even in a discussion at the local bar. DeSantis' Don't Say Gay law is where Putin started about a decade ago, taking any information about gay people out of sex education and out of classrooms. And now it's a full-scale, now it's an imprisonable crime, in fact, to speak well of queer people in Russia in any way. This is like, and Putin has now started building a network of informers, of citizen informers, which brings us to the question, what would a MAGA version of Russia look like here? And I think we've got a big clue out of Idaho. The Idaho Republicans criminalized taking minors, people under 18, across state lines for an abortion, as Kaiser Family Foundation Health News reporter Sarah Varney told NPR. She said, "I'm here at the Idaho-Washington state line, and under the new law here in Idaho, any adult who helps a teenager leave Idaho to terminate a pregnancy will face 2 to 5 years in prison. That includes an aunt, a sister, a brother, a grandmother, or even in cases where the teenage girl has been sexually assaulted. In addition, the man who impregnated that girl can sue and get up to $20,000 from her or her family for having had an abortion," which is an echo of the, bounties on women's heads law in Texas that was passed by MAGA Republicans in Texas and approved by 6 MAGA Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court. But how would Idaho police actually enforce that law? How would they know that a teenager from Idaho showed up in Seattle or in Portland to get an abortion? Well, sure enough, the Sacramento Bee revealed last week, we talked about it on this program, that the automated license plate reader data in that city, in that county, Sacramento County, had been being shared with states that had criminalized abortion. And, they say that they're going to fix this now, but now Georgia, Indiana, South Carolina, and Texas legislatures have passed laws giving the state attorneys general the ability to overrule local prosecutors in blue cities who don't want to prosecute women or families or doctors around abortion issues. And this is not a small matter. 80 district attorneys operating in 29 states have signed pledges to refrain from using criminal legal system resources to criminalize personal medical decisions. But abortion isn't, they're not just going to stop at abortion. I mean, Florida and Texas have already pioneered arresting black men and women for voting. And it worked. I mean, comparing midterm election to midterm election, in 2018, there was a 63% voter turnout in the 2018 midterm election in Florida. It dropped to 54% in 2022, which is why Ron DeSantis was reelected. And it looks like a large chunk of that drop was a drop in black voters. Why? Because, they saw black voters being paraded in shackles on television. And, a lot of people are very concerned. They don't want to go to jail. And they know that DeSantis has put a target on the backs of black people, specifically black voters. Same thing with, don't even think about being out and queer in MAGA America. Should the MAGA Republicans take national power? I mean, we've seen what DeSantis did to the universities in Florida. There's now even every 5 years you have to fill out a form as a teacher or as a student talking about your politics. And if your politics aren't acceptable, you're out. Plus, the new college, he replaced the whole leadership of it. He's putting basically loyalty tests, political purity tests. This is what Viktor Orban did in Hungary. This is what Putin did in Russia 15 years ago. I mean, this is bad stuff. And then, of course, we've got the same oligarchy problem here in the United States that Russia and Hungary have, countries where the oligarchs have taken over the political system because our Supreme Court decriminalized billionaires buying politicians, decriminalized political bribery. So, oligarchies don't tend to work out well. They tend to turn into dictatorships and single-party rule. And that may well be where we end up if we don't do something about this. So, we all need, Democrats, independents, and Republicans need to be repudiating these MAGA Republicans in every corner of this land before they can seize any more political power. And before we reach the point, if they seize police power, where we can't turn back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Climate change is melting down America. Oh, and inflation is down, too. We'll be right back. And welcome back. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how are you today?
I am great, but I'll get better. How about you?
Well, I woke up again, not in jail and not in the hospital, Tom, so it's something to build on.
There you go. It's step one.
Don't know what the future brings.
Yeah.
Hey, you remember Eugene Debs and the
I don't remember him, but
party,
I know,
right?
he died before I was born, I think, but I know who he was, yeah.
Oh, well, as well he should be.
Yeah. Bernie's got Eugene Debs memorabilia all around his house and his office and stuff.
A quote from him when he was being tried, one trial anyway, I don't know how many times they abused the guy. Your Honor, while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free.
That's beautiful. He's also, I believe, the only person in American history to have run for president, serious candidate to have run for president from jail.
From prison.
Yeah, from prison.
Yes.
He was imprisoned for opposing World War I. And, that is the precedent that Trump is pointing to right now. So
yes, and
troubling.
so much of what's going on now, I'd like to point out to you, is unprecedented. It really is. And I love you, but you're drawing your analogies from historical events. This is totally uncharted territory.
I don't think so. I think we're going down a path that has been traveled many, many times before. But
there's nuclear missiles involved, Tom.
Well, there were nuclear missiles involved when Russia went from being a democracy to being an oligarchy to then being an autocracy. Same thing with Hungary. I mean, although Hungary doesn't have nukes, but they live in a world
Everything that's going on now is an economic scheme, though, and it's global in a totally unprecedented way. Our black market, for instance, how much of that you think isn't directly owned by the powers that be?
I don't know.
At this point,
I don't know. I mean, traditionally black markets are owned by people who are outside the traditional power structures. That's why they use black markets. But
yeah,
who knows? I mean,
how things change.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole, what company or person do you think is engaging in black market activity?
Indirectly, at least, I would imagine any hedge fund in the world is probably invested in everything at this point.
How?
Armaments and everything.
These are regulated industries.
Well, regulated is like talking about unemployment numbers. The numbers are kind of cooked, I'm
not willing to go down that road.
Well, back to the Wobblies, Tom. Tom, you have a very bully pulpit. It seems with computers internationally, it would be just an automatic to set up an IWW at this point. And
the IWW still exists, James.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The Wobblies are still around. They've geez, a couple of years ago, wasn't it, Sean? We had somebody from the Wobblies on this program. International Workers of the World. Say what?
We need a membership drive.
Well,
I wasn't aware of that, and I'm sure many other people are not.
Join up and become an evangelist. I think it's a rump group. I think it's kind of an homage to the good old days kind of group, as opposed to, a group that's actually organizing workers right now, because you've got, real unions who are doing real work. I mean, when the Wobblies were first founded, you could go to prison or get murdered by the police for being a union member. So
they were still busting today.
Yeah, it was but it was a very different world. James, thanks for the call. Cynicism aside, 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans trying to ban abortion. They're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, attacking basically the entire queer community. Whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. Kim Reynolds, the Republican governor of Iowa, is scheduled on Friday to sign the bill that passed last night. 6-week abortion ban. Most women don't even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. They say that this is a heartbeat bill, but there is no heart at 6 weeks to beat. There are little cells, muscle fibers in there that start twitching that will eventually become a heart. But, this is another one of the incredibly deceptive strategies that the forced pregnancy, forced birth group has been pushing for years and years. But anyhow, she will be signing that on Friday, and it was passed last night by the legislature to shouts from Democrats and the gallery of shame, shame, shame. I have a feeling this is not going to turn out well for the GOP. Love to hear your thoughts on that. So, number two, I think it's time to nationalize the fossil fuel industry. Jimmy Carter tried to do something about this, and I'm going to play this out of the 360 here, Sean. Jimmy Carter came right out and said, we've got to do something about this. Here we go. And keep in mind, this was 1979, Jimmy Carter.
The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. What I have to say to you now about energy is simple and vitally important. Point one, I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never.
And he was serious about that, although Reagan came in and blew
Moreover,
it
I
up.
will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000.
Can you imagine? Had he not been, had Ronald Reagan not committed treason by cutting a deal with Ayatollah Khomeini to hold the American hostages for literally right up until noon on January 20th, 1981. Had Reagan not cut that deal and then for 6 years, illegally sold weapons to Iran and then used that money, that illegal money, to ship weapons down to the Contras in Central America, we wouldn't have the energy crisis. We wouldn't have global warming as bad as it is. We'd be way ahead of that curve, and America would be electrified. And B, we wouldn't have destabilized the governments of Central America. We wouldn't have a border crisis. But, the past is the past. So what do we do now? Well, I think it's time to nationalize the fossil fuel industry. You've heard this rant from me before. We have nationalized literally hundreds of companies and dozens of industries over the last century. It has been done by nearly every president. Certainly nearly every president up until even George W. Bush was nationalizing industries. So I think it's time for us to buy the fossil fuel industry. We could buy the four largest fossil fuel companies in the United States for about $2 trillion, about the cost of Donald Trump's tax cuts for the billionaires. And, let the tax cuts expire and use that same money to buy the fossil fuel industry and stop them from buying our politicians.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these just insane, this isn't going to stop it, but it's like we're feeding this insane weather that we're getting. Is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you could be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Final story here, and then I'll very quickly pick up your phone calls. Leslie Van Houten. This was 1968, I think, or 1969. She participated in the LaBianca, the Leno and Rosemary LaBianca murders, where they were both stabbed to death by the Manson family. At the time, she said that she only held down Rosemary LaBianca while another person was stabbing her to death. She later said that she stabbed Rosemary's dead body at the orders of Charles Manson.
She's been in prison for roughly 50 years. And the last 3 times, the parole board recommended that she be released, saying that she's no longer a threat to the community and that she's been a constructive prisoner over the years. She's found faith. She has an eagerness to teach and to participate in teams, and has expressed extreme remorse about her participation in those murders. And so this time, the governor of California, Mr. Newsom, said, cool, let her go. So she's going into a halfway house, I guess this week. Oh, no, she walked out on Tuesday. Excuse me. It was yesterday. So, I personally, my take on this is I think good. We should believe in America, in rehabilitation, in the ability of people to turn their lives around. In fact, our criminal justice system should be predicated on that. Like, probably the best example in the world is Norway's. And if you've never seen Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next, put that on your list. There's just a brilliant 10 minutes in that movie about the Norwegian prison system and how it works. So, and their, just their whole approach to the penal system, to crime and punishment it's quite extraordinary. So, what do you think of that too? Let's pick up your phone calls here. Jim in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Hey, Tom. I'll tell you first. Let me get into. Every time I call, the lady that answers the phone, she puts a smile on my face.
Oh, that's great. That's choice.
She's just the greatest. And number 2, I've learned so much from you. Every day I hear you, I learn so much. And now I'm going to get to my point. The U.S. Postal Service. I'm retired, and I am with NALC and the FEHB. That's Federal Health Employees Benefits Plan, and they're medical. And they gave me an option, which when the Postal Service gives you an option, you go see you later. And I called. They gave me an option to go into their HMO, and I went no. And I called and I told them, don't ever do that again. Don't ever send me any junk like that again, so on and so forth. And the lady said, I shouldn't say anything, but you are very smart, staying with what you have with the FEHB.
Wow. Is the HMO now, like a Medicare Advantage kind of plan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So now they told me, well, too bad, Jim, because in 2025, you're going into it if you like it or not.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
So this is Louis DeJoy's latest little thing? Now, is it explicitly called Medicare Advantage, or is it just called the Postal Service's HMO administered by XYZ Insurance Company?
Medicare Advantage.
Oh, so they're literally forcing postal retirees into Medicare Advantage starting in a year and a half.
Yes, and I went to the post office, and I know some guys there, and I talked to one of the clerks, and I said, are they forcing this too? He said, oh, no, just the retirees. And I thought, splendid.
Yeah, well, those guys will be retirees someday, too.
They're punching off a group at a time. Yeah. Just like you said, with the doctors and everything, a lot of people don't even realize they're getting switched over, but we're getting switched over, and we can't do a darn thing about it. Wow. And that's I called about this probably about 6 months ago with Mark Pocan, and he was going to check on it and see what was going on.
Well, the next time he's on, you need to call again and ask him to check, and also Congressman Khanna, who comes on, and I believe there's a few other members of Congress that we've been talking to about coming on and taking calls from listeners. We'll see how it works out. But.
Okay. Yeah, I just say, what you were warning about a year ago is not coming to fruition. They're pushing everybody into this thing.
Yep. It's anyway. This was George Bush's plan when he pushed through Medicare Advantage in 2005. Was he wanted to privatize Social Security and Medicare, and he was only able to do one of them, and that was Medicare. And he put the gears in motion, and here we go. Okay, well, thanks, Jim, for the FYI on that.
Well, Tom, I also agree with you on privatizing the fossil fuel industry, nationalizing, and my wife does also.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim, and thanks to your wife. Good talking to you. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Your show is so highly regarded. Senators and congressmen listen to it, and I'm hoping there's some DOJ attorneys listening, because what's driving me crazy, the idiot Trump is trying to stall his trial till after the election.
Right. That's his new strategy.
Trump is not the only presidential candidate running for president that was indicted. The idiot needs to know it's normal in the U.S. to be indicted and run for president. Rick Perry had 2 indictments. A grand jury indicted him for abuse of power when he was governor of Texas. He attempted to force a district attorney's resignation. So I say Trump can run from his jail cell. It's been done before, as you say.
But Rick Perry wasn't prosecuted during the time that he was running, was he? It wasn't that the trial date was beyond the election.
He finally dropped out. But what it was, and one of the indictments, it's an awful thing that happened. They said one of the dismissals was so terrible because it claimed public servants have the right to engage in expression, even threats regarding their official duties. So it wasn't a good outcome.
Yeah.
And Perry was just as awful as Trump. He had $17 million in donations from just 3 donors. So he would have been awful.
Whoa. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good data point there, Jessica. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, and that I second the sentiments of the earlier caller. Joyce is fantastic. Anytime I call in, she is always wonderful.
Well, that's great to hear, George. She puts up with some serious abuse from the crazies, but I think that and I know that she appreciates the positive feedback.
Well, I hope us more normal folk help to even it out for her.
I think so. I can't speak for her, but I think so.
A couple of things I noticed yesterday and today. Politico had an article yesterday entitled Debate Dodger over the possibility that Donald Trump may elect not to participate in the upcoming August 23rd Republican presidential debate in Milwaukee.
Right.
And the apparent sentiment in the party is almost equally divided as to whether or not he should be there. And then today, our former Republican and courageous Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois released a letter through his organization, Country First, urging everyone to send a $1 contribution to Chris Christie's campaign so that he can be on that debate stage.
Oh,
and
interesting.
It just occurred to me, you've got what appears to be a deteriorating and slowly collapsing major party that has the political equivalent of mad cow disease. There's like gaps in their collective brain.
Mm-hmm.
They're so beholden to and fearful of the Maga base and Trump himself that they're willing to bend over backwards to make sure that nobody gets them out on the stage like Chris Christie, who, as Kinzinger said in his letter, is sworn to go toe-to-toe with Trump and confront him.
Yeah.
But then if Trump doesn't feel like showing up, well, I guess that's okay.
I'm guessing that Chris Christie being on that stage might be the thing that would cause Trump not to show up. Because he knows he can bully pretty much everybody else. I can't imagine, Nikki Haley or, frankly, even Ron DeSantis, giving it back to Trump, bully to bully. DeSantis is the kind of bully who lets other people do his work for him. And the rest of them, I don't think are even competent bullies. But Chris Christie, he knows how to be a bully. He really does.
Well, yeah, remember how he bullied the other side of the river by shutting down the bridge. And
yep.
Just because a mayor wouldn't endorse him.
Yep.
I mean, geez.
Yep.
But still, in the context of where our country is now, it's better for all of us and for the future of America that somebody with the political and intellectual tools to do so will confront Trump in a debate.
Yeah.
And possibly expose him for the fraud that he is, that the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice. I think that during the break, I'll track down Chris Christie's presidential website and donate $1. I'd like to get on his mailing list anyway, you know, and I typically do that. I donated either $5 or $15 to Donald Trump back in 2015 to get on his list. And I'm still on the damn list, I'm telling you. So, you know, it's something that, you know, particularly, you know, reporters and whatnot, people like, you know, in my job do just to get on people's, you know, donor lists so that you know what they're saying to their donors. It's important stuff. George, thanks. Thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate it. Mike in Snake River, Idaho. Hey, Mike, you've got a report from Idaho for us?
Yeah, Tom, it's a scary one, actually. If I didn't know better, I wouldn't know that anything was going awry here. I mean, I've told you before, I lived in Denver for 20 years when we legalized cannabis, and day-to-day in Idaho Falls, Idaho, is just like day-to-day in Denver.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, day-to-day in Germany under Hitler before he got into a war was not all that different. If you weren't involved in politics, you know, if you just went about your job, life goes on. And in fascist dictatorships, just like you walk around in Moscow, I mean, things look normal right now.
I mean, we did the Pride Parade here in this small town was amazing. I couldn't believe the turnout, you know, and there was no issues. I didn't see any protesters or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, then you've got this, like, Idaho Freedom Foundation. Have you heard of them at all?
I don't know. You know, it sounds familiar, but they all kind of sound the same with the word freedom in them.
Well, like you, I got on their mailing list just to find out what the other side is doing, and it's insane. I mean, they publish these articles praising heroes like Joe McCarthy, Joe Rogan, you know, and are behind things like them just eliminating a maternal mortality board here in the state, even though our maternal mortality is, you know, several points higher than the national average.
Wow.
I mean, these guys are, and they're getting people on the school boards, especially up north around Sandpoint and, you know, that area.
Right. I'm guessing they got rid of the maternal mortality board in anticipation of maternal mortality going up as a result of outlawing abortion.
I don't know. I think they just, you know, it's kind of like Trump. If we don't have any information, then we can't draw any conclusions from it.
Yeah. Well, good luck, Mike. I hope that Idahoans, it is Idahoans, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I hope that that you Idahoans can pull this thing out, you know, can pull this off. You know, Rachel Maddow's latest podcast is about how in Poland, abortion has turned people against the right-wingers in government. I hope that happens here, and I hope it happens in Idaho. Mike, thanks for the update. Good to hear from you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Well, you know, you spoke of Leslie Van Houten, and you probably know what I'm going to say, given how many conversations we've had. But let me say that
if she was black,
why do you do that? See, that was rude.
Well, you just set it up. I mean, come on, you set up the ball for me. Don't expect me not to hit it. By the way, I'm loving your Substack newsletter. People need to check it out. Tell them how to get there.
ROHNKENYATTA, Ron Kenyatta .substack.com.
There you go.
But Tom, listen. You know, and I appreciate that, but since you brought that up, let me just say this. You know, the stuff, I deal with very difficult subjects in a very difficult way sometimes. So it's not a newsletter for everybody.
I know.
And, okay. So getting back to Leslie Van Houten, I was in kindergarten when the Manson murders occurred. Mm-hmm. And in Los Angeles at the time, understand the city is still wincing from the riots. We still have Mayor Sam Yorty. at the time that the murders occurred, it did not just terrorize the affluent white community, it terrorized black people. Because part of what Charles Manson, he was into some very racist stuff, too.
Well, wasn't the whole helter-skelter thing a race war that he wanted?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm not going to violate confidences, but even though I was 5 years old at the time, later in my life, as a result of being involved in law enforcement for a very brief time in Los Angeles, I met many people that were involved with the Manson family. And I can tell you that black people in Southern California and Los Angeles at the time, everyone was terrorized. And my point that I'm trying to make is that because of that, when you look at the peripheral damage, the societal damage that whole crew did, how she could walk, it blows my mind. Yeah. Because you see, as you stole my thunder and said, were she black, she would have fried.
Probably. Well, she initially did get a death sentence, and then California outlawed the death penalty, or it was commuted or something like that. I don't remember what it was.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was a terrible thing. So basically, the argument that you're making is that she's perpetrator rather than victim, and the argument that I'm making is that she's victim who became perpetrator. I'm seeing it a little more gray than you are, I think.
No, you're not.
She was 19 years old.
I agree with you.
She had been laced with LSD for days, and I mean, she was screwed up badly by Charles Manson.
The place was called the Spawn Ranch, and we concur there. I'm simply saying beyond that, Tom, I look through everything in life through the lens of a black man in the United States. Everything we do, we flip the script. You can take Trayvon Martin's killer, George Zimmerman. What could a black man have done that? And I'm just simply saying that it gives me pause. Yeah, that's all I'm getting at.
Yeah, or if the January 6th so-called protesters had been black.
God.
Yeah, don't get either one of us started, right? Kenyatta, good to hear from you. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
You have a great one. It's 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. 53 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Florida. Excuse me. Hey, Brad, what's up? Or no, Illinois. Yeah.
Love listening to you. I'm just a grunt-level truck driver, but I'm thinking a lot of the women in this country, men too, obviously, but about the abortion issue, you have the Republican Party. Freedom this, freedom that, freedom. And yet, what are they doing on the abortion issue? This is not some deep intellectual idea. And I think a lot of people are getting the absolute, not just hypocrisy, but the controlling impulse of not toxic masculinity, but toxic machismo.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
Well, this is, this bizarre homoerotic and, homophobic video that Ron DeSantis is promoting. I think it was the final nail in the coffin of his campaign, but we'll see. Brad, thank you. Well said. Mike in La Center, Washington. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to thank you for all your invaluable work, as always. I was wondering what you thought, with the rationale that Alito used in overturning Roe, that it wasn't stated explicitly in the Constitution. Maybe we should present him with the corporate personhood.
Right. The modern corporation didn't exist at the time the Constitution was written.
Exactly. So he'd have to throw it out, wouldn't he?
I would think so. But, we all know that this whole original thing is just a scam that these guys use to justify whatever they want to do, frankly.
Exactly. Yeah, they can contort their logic in any way that they. And
now they've got this new scam, this major questions doctrine. There is no such thing. I mean, it's just like, I don't recall who came up with this. I think it might have been Neil Gorsuch. It's probably John Roberts. But when we're going to violate precedent, when we're going to overturn the law, when we're going to ignore the language of an actual law itself, and just say it doesn't matter what that law says, you can't enforce it. We're going to call it a major questions doctrine. These guys, they're politicians in black robes pretending to be judges.
Exactly.
And they're not elected by anybody. So the question then becomes, Mike, what do we do? Well, we've got to keep a Democrat in the White House for at least the next 10 to 12 years. I don't see an alternative.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Good to hear from you. I just, I'm telling you, the Supreme Court is, it's a 1/3 of the government. It's a major, it's a major branch of government. I mean, the court isn't all of the federal courts, and all of the federal courts are the final third, but it's a big deal. And that's why Republicans have spent so much time and so many hundreds of millions of dollars corrupting this court. And they will continue to until we do something about it. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark.
This is from the prologue. On a hot day reached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCatherine remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCatherine didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCatherine said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCatherine to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCatherine is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, He praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. So yesterday, there was this hearing in Congress where Jamie Raskin was on this committee, and it was the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, you know. It was the guy who's like, you know, this Chinese spy who's on the run from the Justice Department. He's the guy who's going to tell you that Biden was taking a bribe. Anyway, they decided to go off on something else yesterday. They decided to go off on how COVID came from a lab leak in China. And Jamie Raskin is like, okay, Republicans, you think this means what? Well, it means that Trump wasn't at fault or something like that. Or maybe it's all China's fault, or we can blame it on somebody else or something. And Raskin goes, you know, Dr. Deborah Birx said that we lost hundreds of thousands of Americans because of the flaws in Donald Trump's response to COVID. That has nothing to do with where it came from. And then, well, this is exactly what he said, his exact words. He said that would only deepen Donald Trump's culpability because he's the one who repeatedly and enthusiastically praised China's early handling of the pandemic and assured us that he was working closely with President Xi on the response to it. He says, so let's just get the facts straight and leave all the political myth-making aside. Brilliant. Yeah, the origins of COVID. I think it's important that we remember, too, that back in the day, there was, you know, Donald Trump did the right thing in March. I think it was around March 11th, something like that. He shut down the country because COVID was, you know, I mean, you had New York, New Jersey, Seattle. You had hospitals that were like starting to stack up refrigerator trucks for all the bodies. People were dropping like flies from COVID. And then a month later, in I believe it was April 7th, I'll have to go back and check my notes, but my recollection is it was around April 7th. The New York Times and the Washington Post on the same day at the same time, along with all the major media and their lead stories on MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, all of them, Fox. Everybody led with the story that it turns out black people are dying at a higher rate than white people. And so far, almost all the deaths are in blue states. And when that happened, Donald Trump said, whoa, Nelly, and stopped the entire COVID response dead in its tracks and said, it's time to get back to work. Put those black people back to work. So what if they die? Right? I mean, this was Trump's response. It was a genocidal response. Not entirely unique in American history, but, you know, pretty damn recent. And I think it's gone down the memory hole, and I think that's a shame, and I don't think it should have gone down the memory hole. And I don't know, maybe I'll revive it tomorrow. We'll see. But in any case, regardless of where COVID came from, 500,000 Americans died unnecessarily, according to Trump's own people. We had the highest death rate in the world. And not only that, or at least in the developed world, and not only that, but red states, or red counties, people in red counties, than twice as likely to die from COVID than people in blue counties.
Why? Because in red counties, they were ignoring public health warnings and not wearing masks. And in blue counties, they were paying attention to public health warnings and wearing masks. It's real simple. And still you've got idiots running around going, oh, don't take the vaccine. Oh, those masks, they don't do any good. If masks don't do any good, the next time you have surgery, just ask the surgeon not to wear a mask. See what happens. You know, surgeons started wearing masks in the late 1880s, 1870s, something like that, you know, somewhere in there. Post Louis Pasteur. And what happened? Hospital infections went way down. Because surgeons weren't breathing their, you know, germs into the open wounds anymore. Come on, people. All righty. There is a battle now. I mentioned in the first hour that I think it's important for us to start to differentiate between MAGA Republicans and Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney Republicans. Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney Republicans are pretty damn toxic, you know, George Bush Republicans. They have done a lot of damage to this country, but we're still here. If MAGA Republicans get a hold of this country, in a bit, you know, I mean, genuinely get a hold of this country, all bets are off. And so now this war with the MAGA Republicans is shifting out of, you know, Democrats versus Republicans and into an intramural war within the Republican Party. And Mitch McConnell has just declared war. The National Republican Senatorial Campaign is, or committee rather, is chaired by Steve Daines, a Montana Republican. And they are pushing now two anti-MAGA candidates, one in Nevada and one in Montana. In Nevada, they're trying to undercut a guy by the name of Jim Marchant, who is a climate denier, an election denier, a Trump humper. He won the Republican primary but lost the general election to a Democrat when he was running for Secretary of State. And now he wants to run for the United States Senate. And Jackie Rosen, the Democratic senator, says, welcome to the race. You know, he's a forced birther in a state that is roughly 2/3 pro-choice. And but the National Republican Senatorial Committee wants to put up a guy by the name of Sam Brown, who's an Iraq War veteran and or an Afghanistan War veteran. Excuse me, survived an IED attack in Afghanistan. And a spokesperson for Marchant said, Jim Marchant has never lost a primary, outspent every time. Sam Brown has never won a primary despite his attempts in multiple states. Yeah, so let's see how that goes. Well, so that's Nevada. Now, in Montana, same deal. Election denier, 22 Trump endorsee, Matt Rosendale, Congressman Matt Rosendale of Montana, who's also looking at a Senate bid, says, because Mitch McConnell has now, and John Thune and whatnot, they're backing a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL by the name of Tim Sheehy, who is not a MAGA candidate. And the MAGA candidate, Matt Rosendale, says, congratulations to Mitch McConnell and the party bosses on getting their chosen candidate. Now Washington has two candidates, Tim Sheehy and John Tester, who will protect the D.C. cartel, referring to the pair as the McConnell-Biden establishment. Right. So it's going to be real interesting to watch how this all shakes out. And finally, a crazy alert for the day. And then I'll get to your calls here. Remember this guy, Andrew Tate? He was arrested to much fanfare, maybe 3 months ago in Romania, as I recall. And what he had been doing was he had set up an apartment in Romania, and he was luring young women into his apartment with promises of a temporary job. And when they got in there, basically locking them in and forcing them and raping them in front of cameras. I was going to say forcing them to do porn, but this was rape. And he was charged with rape. So here's this guy who is like out on bail, but, under indictment in Romania for sex trafficking and rape. And they got videotape of it because he was videotaping the whole thing. And who decides to spend 2.5 hours talking to him? Tucker Carlson on Twitter this week. And who's promoting this 2.5-hour Twitter thing? Elon Musk. And Bernie Kerik, the former New York City police commissioner. I mean, some of the people some of the folks on Twitter are pushing back. One said, Tate is charged in Romania with rape, human trafficking, and forming an organized crime group to sexually exploit women. Are you an Andrew Tate right-winger or a Sound of Freedom right-winger? You really can't be both. That was Eric Erickson. Right-winger extraordinaire, hate radio personality and everything else. Others were pointing out that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone ran less than 2.5 hours. And who wants to spend 2.5 hours with, a sex trafficker? Well, I guess there is a market for this. The incels, maybe? I don't know. They seem to be Republicans. Joe Walsh, a former Republican congressman, said 2.5 hours defending and singing the praises of an accused rapist and human trafficker. So brave, Tucker. Carlson called him a hero, called Tate a hero. Right. How long is this going to work for Tucker Carlson? Just going harder and harder and harder to the fascist right? I don't know. And I thought that Fox was going to sue him for violating his contract if he continued doing his program on Twitter. Apparently not. This is like the 15th episode, it seems. So, Tucker's rolling along. He's reincarnated himself over on Twitter. And this is the kind of stuff that he thinks Republicans want to hear, apparently. Or at least his followers. Gee. Amazing stuff. So what say you? I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break at 16 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program, helping you win the water cooler wars.
This is the Thom Hartmann program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Don in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Hey, Don, thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Oh, hi. I just wondered, wasn't listening earlier. You had listened to any of talked about the Iowa abortion law. Mm-hmm. I was watching Morning Joe a little bit this morning, and they had a clip, and it had a guy named Brad Sherman on for a few seconds, and he said, what he said was this: if they are not ready to have a baby, they shouldn't have sex.
Yeah, I saw that clip.
Right. That's
he was a state representative or a state senator?
He's a state rep. And I looked it up online, and the next sentence was, a lot of people need to review their birds and bees. That's his. Wow. And what more he said, I don't know. That's all I was able to find.
Remember the Republican, we've been here before. There was a Republican maybe a decade ago who got just pilloried for saying that the best birth control device was an aspirin, put it between your knees.
Oh, yeah. That was the guy who ran against Ann Richards.
Yeah.
He was some oil man, right-wing, crazy right-winger, and she beat him.
Yeah, I know. I forget his name. He's kind of lost to the obscurity of time, but the line was memorable.
It was pretty good. But if anybody's interested, you can look him up. There's I was just thinking we should flood him with emails, suggesting that he have himself neutered, and so that he wouldn't contribute to any unwanted pregnancy.
Well, there is something to be said for vasectomies. It's.
If you're at the point you don't want to have children, that's fine.
I am guessing a lot of married couples are now saying, okay, birth control can have mistakes, but vasectomies and tubal ligation don't. And so, we're going to go that route. I haven't seen any statistics on this, but I'm guessing probably within the next year or two we'll start seeing them. And I'll bet you're going to see a lot more people. This is what I did. After our third child was born, it was like, Louise and I were very clear that 3 was enough. So, I went and got fixed.
Yeah, well,
never looked back. I don't regret it at all.
You have to wonder, I lived in Texas for 20 years, and a lot of people, this is like everywhere else. Most of the people are good people. People are, you have certainly, but the politicians are, jerks. And, when Mississippi tried to pass a fetal personhood amendment, and they lost 60-40.
Yeah.
60-40 seems to be the standard. Then if you go to women, it's 70-30 in support of it. And if you go to women of childbearing age, it's 80-20. And this could make the difference because the Democrats are mostly pretty feckless, and I'm not too impressed. But they won't continue with this.
Right.
So if some of these Republicans can be pushed out of office, even in places like Iowa, it would be good. Because Iowa didn't used to be a right-wing state.
No, I think there's a
It wasn't
reckoning
in the middle
coming.
place.
I think there's a reckoning coming.
I think so, too.
So you live in Pittsburgh, Kansas. What's going on in Kansas?
Well, of course, we had the 60-40, they tried to amend the state constitution
To
back
outlaw abortion.
about in April. And to make it more difficult to get an abortion, because the state constitution guarantees the right to an abortion. Now they've got it pretty limited. They got to sew it up to where but people were still coming here from Missouri to have abortions, and of course they tried to push that through on an off-term, the minor election, the primary election, and with a very deceptive ad campaign by the Catholic Church that went on for weeks. And then I was afraid it was going to pass. And then in the last week, all of a sudden, signs appeared everywhere opposing it.
There you go.
And it lost 60-40.
There
So
you go.
people are the same.
Don, thank you.
have
I got to run. I'm sorry, but thank you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your calls. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, thanks for listening to KTRC. What's up?
Hey, I called in to disagree with you about nationalizing and taking over the oil industry.
Okay, go for it.
New Mexico is a blue state that's heavily funded by the oil and gas extraction industries. My wife grew up in southeast New Mexico, which is part of the Permian Basin, which right now is some of the most productive oil fields in the United States. And she has a lot of friends and relatives that are involved in the industry. And so I read about it a lot. And I just think it would be way too radical, way too divisive, way too upsetting, and it would cause Democrats to lose a lot of elections. And I think a more profitable way to pursue it would be talking about cleaning up the atmosphere, because it's accumulating. If we stop burning oil next year, all that gas and methane and carbon dioxide is still going to be in the atmosphere, and it's still going to be increasing.
Yeah.
So why don't we focus on, like, if some Democrat wanted to make a name for themselves and get national attention, I would say, let's pause the manned space program. There's really no reason to spend billions of dollars to send a dozen people to Mars. It's stupid.
Yeah, but the pollution from that is real, but it's negligible compared to just the pollution from cars. Let's go back to this topic of nationalizing the fossil fuel industry. I'm not suggesting that the president should declare under the Fifth Amendment eminent domain that he's taking over these companies in the way that it was done in, for example, Venezuela. What I'm suggesting is that on the open market, in the stock market, the Dow, the Dow or whatever, the New York Stock Exchange, that the federal government go in and buy enough stock in the four largest oil companies in the United States to own a controlling majority of the seats on their board of directors. And then the changes that they would make is, number one, they would stop paying money to Republican politicians. Number two, they would stop funding global climate change denial and deniers. And number three, they would start making the transition from being a fossil fuel company to being an energy company, with the idea that they're going to get into solar, they're going to get into wind, and they're going to, and number four, that they would clean up their drilling operations all across the United States massive amounts of methane are leaking into the atmosphere because these companies will not maintain their wells or will not properly cap their wells or have walked away from old wells that are still leaking. Massive amounts of methane.
It costs them more money to manage the methane. I know. That's why
and then to make this palatable to the American people, these companies are spinning off, $1 trillion a year in profit, right? Or a $500 billion a year in profit. So we should do with that profit what Alaska does
because they basically nationalized the oil in Alaska. They said, if you're going to extract oil from Alaska, you have to pay a percentage of that revenue to us. And if you're a citizen of Alaska, every man, woman, and child in Alaska every year gets a check for somewhere between $1,500 and $5,000, depending on how good a year they had. The year that Sarah Palin ran for vice president, it was about $4,200, if I'm remembering correctly, per person. So a family of 6 got $4,200 times 6. We could take that dividend money from those 4 big oil companies in the United States and turn it into a citizen dividend that would be basically a universal basic income for everybody in the United States. It would lift everybody up. And it doesn't have to be permanent, by the way. Once these companies are reconfigured and doing well, we could sell them back to the market. Let me just give you a little background here. This has been done before. Woodrow Wilson nationalized the country's railroads, the country's phone companies, and the country's telegraph. He nationalized Western Union. He nationalized Bell. Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, nationalized 3,300 mines, all of the nation's railroads, 26 oil companies, Western Electric, the Hughes Tool Company, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and Montgomery Ward. He nationalized every single one of those companies. Harry Truman, after FDR died, he nationalized the Monongahela Railroad Company, 3 of the nation's largest steel mills, and hundreds of smaller railroads. In the 1970s, when Penn Central collapsed, Richard Nixon nationalized fully 20 railroads in the United States, merged them together, and created Amtrak. And it doesn't end there. I mean, in 1984, Reagan nationalized the Continental Illinois Bank and Trust Company in a crisis, and then he nationalized the entire savings and loan industry. 1,000 savings and loans all became the property of the federal government for about it was almost a decade it took to unwind that thing. At the Resolution Trust Corporation. So it's not like President Bush, George W. Bush nationalized several of the nation's airlines and created the Air Stabilization Board. This was after 9/11 when the nation's airlines were in trouble. We bought their stock and took controlling interest of several of these airlines. This is not a radical idea, is what I'm saying.
It'll never work.
Well, you're probably right, Brian. But I'm telling you, it's not a crazy idea. Brian, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you. I appreciate it. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's your media support group for We the People. We'll be right back. Today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later.
Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. To hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money. But what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Lucy in Lombard, Illinois, listening on WCPT. Hey, Lucy, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. I was just going to mention I watched Morning Joe today and yesterday, and they actually had a couple positive segments on Joe Biden, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Since very few people talk positive.
I think they realize that there's probably not going to be a reasonable Republican opponent, and these old Republicans, you know, Joe Scarborough and many of his colleagues that are on the show, they actually are invested in America being a democratic nation, even if they don't like Social Security, you know.
That's true. Today they had a panel on, too, of 8 Democrats, and they asked them about his age and, you know, if they were concerned, and everybody said they were concerned, but they pretty much all said they would vote for him no matter what if he was the nominee.
Yeah.
So that was kind of encouraging. But then they also had to mention that he did not go to the dinner they had last night at the summit that he's at.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of interesting that they had to bring that up because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Trump went to the dinners but didn't go to the meetings the next day. So, you know, it's kind of ironic that they would bring it up. So,
yeah. Well, jet lag really whacks you, and you know, the older you get, the more it whacks you. So I get it.
Yeah, that's
He's
true.
probably just tired.
I'll be honest with you, Tom. I have an 84-year-old brother. We're 7 in our family, 7 siblings. He is still working part-time as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and I don't see him ever retiring. And his mind is great, and he could outdo me.
Some people are just spectacular. My mother-in-law, in her 90s, built last year, I think she's 93, maybe she just had a birthday, maybe 94. She built a patio with 25-pound flagstones in her backyard. I mean, she dug up the backyard and laid down the stones and the whole bit.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah,
that's just great.
Louisa's got some great genes. Knock wood here.
Right. Pass on to your kids.
There you go.
So, that was it.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
nice to hear from you, Lucy. Thanks for the call. Betsy in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Betsy, what's on your mind today?
Well, I mean, I just listened to the call from Idaho Falls, and I live here in Idaho. I actually grew up in eastern Idaho where he was calling from. But I live in the other side of the state now. But the thing I was calling about was the fact, Idaho and abortions, because I'm really, truly afraid of what's going on here, because I have a daughter, and being able to get any care here is almost ridiculous because there's no doctors here.
Yeah.
Because these guys have driven out the doctors.
Right.
And
the red states seem to drive out doctors and scientists and teachers. All 3 of those categories, there are shortages in most red states right now, and that's really not healthy. It's not a good thing.
And I worked for the state. I was a social worker. I worked for health and welfare. I mean, that's a really terrible thing. And I also worked on the Evan McMullen campaign. My friend and I actually did the help work, and we developed a software program that actually helped him, and we also helped do other things for other campaigns, and the things that we have come across, the type of money things that we found are going on across the country. But so we were helping with the things we've learned, but in the state, what goes on in Eastern Ohio in the politics, what he was telling about the board is all true because of these guys but a lot of these people have come from out of state that have influenced the state. But a lot of stuff that they're doing.
That's right. There are people who are trying to make Idaho into a free nation kind of state, right? The the Free Staters.
Correct. I mean, we have a lot of people who have come from California, a lot of them from Texas. I mean, you can see it up here, especially in the Boise Valley, but they've come and done the same thing in eastern Idaho. The same people that are not Idahoans.
Yeah.
These people in southeast Idaho, I mean, it was not like that.
What's it going to take, Betsy? I mean, my sense of it is that in the red states, in the low population, very, very rural red states, you've got areas that are just entirely white and entirely straight. Obviously, there are LGBTQ people there, but they're not popping their heads up, with much frequency. And so it's real easy for this kind of bigotry to exist for generations, because people are not having the experience of interacting with and knowing people who are either a different race or
that way. A lot of them stay down at the table, but in the Boise area where I live, you see more of it.
You see more people of color and more gay people. Yeah, well, that's good, but I mean, I'm just, what's it going to take for these red states to finally, say,
change?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of them, the politics, to get. See, the problem is around here is the old guard. You've got the rich families that we have, from everywhere from the Simplot family. So, like Butch Otter, I went to college with his daughters at one of his daughters at ISU. It's kind of funny how you get to the old guard knowing who's even in. So I went to was Barbie Hart. She's actually one of the people in our lovely little house here in Senators here in Idaho. I mean, these are people who are these lunatics in Idaho who weren't that way, who went really far with becoming friends with these crazies who come into Idaho. It's kind of funny how these people have changed who weren't that way when you're in college.
Right.
Like, how did they become so far off the...
Well, this is what the media does. This is what Fox News, Fox so-called news, and right-wing hate radio does to people. I mean, people listen to somebody who sounds credible and seems to be validated by the callers and by the information and things, and they start to believe that it's true. It's a real unfortunate thing. Betsy, I
here in Idaho, Raul Labrador.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's a piece of work. Betsy, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Denise in Folsom, California. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hi, first-time caller.
Well, thank
I
you,
have
Denise.
2 subjects I'm going to say, and then I'll have your comments on it. The first one was 4th of July. We have a block party, and it's very mellow. No one talks politics. We made that rule. But we did have a new couple move in from Florida, part-time here and part-time in Florida. And as the conversations were going on, down the road, the husband said, I don't understand why I have to have my taxes paid for public schools. So I had to think about how I was going to respond to this, and I listen to you all the time, and I love how you say, don't argue with them, just educate them. So I tried to do the best I could with my education, how all of our tax dollars goes into our community to provide for all these services. Of course, he did not like what I said, and he walked away. So this morning, I listen to your show every morning, but before I listen to you, I listen to Politics Girl, which I love her. She's so knowledgeable.
She is great, yeah.
And she had this wonderful woman on this morning, which I hope that you get on your show. Her name is Dora Star Tucker. How did Republicans get so toxic? And she started the conversation exactly what I've been talking about with the private schools, how these Republicans, these freedom moms go in there and they want to do this and do that, take the books and stuff, and they're trying to down the public schools, get rid of them, so then they can go to private, which the corporations, whoever can control them, and bring segregation back in the picture. Right. She went into full detail on this. I'm praying that you get her on your show to educate everybody about what she's saying, how this is all happening. She goes all the way back to history with the slaves and brings it all the way to here.
Yeah.
I love
Although in the modern era, this really started in 1954 after Brown v. Board, when you had several states and counties that literally shut down their entire public school system. I think Prince George's County shut it down for over a year.
Yeah. I just, we have to have our public schools. We have to.
Yeah.
We cannot go back to black and white. But this woman, again, I love the politics girl. She's so educated. I wish people watch her more. But this Star Tucker, so I pulled her up on the YouTube and I was listening to all her other programs. Her just so impressed with her. So please get her on your show if you can to educate people more about this.
We will look it up. We will look her up. Denise, thank you very much for the call. It's the war on public education really does go back to race. But it has now become, about ideology and other things as well. Although a lot of the ideology that it's about now is race also, the whole CRT thing. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Carl in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind today?
Well, I started out with calling to ask you one single, simple question. And like every time I listen for a half an hour or so to your show, and I'm so overwhelmed that I'm almost embarrassed to ask. I heard so many wonderful things and so much educating things. I just wish it wasn't just liberals and progressives that listen to your show. And I'm sure it probably is. I don't think you get any of the Trump MAGA crowd.
We get a few, Earl. Excuse me,
Do
Carl.
you really?
We get a few.
Well, anyway, my question is this. We've talked before. You probably don't remember, but I'm a 30-year retired Marine officer. Mm-hmm. And I was responding earlier today, but with a phone call to the presidential White House comment line regarding our Marines Corps having no commandant because of one blindingly ignorant senator who apparently by himself is holding up and has for months held up nominations.
Yeah, it's Tommy Tuberville, the guy whose only claim to fame and his only his only reason to get elected was that he was the coach at was it Auburn? Yeah. I don't know where.
Auburn.
Yeah. He
I
was a
looked
football
up.
coach.
I researched him after I heard a few weeks ago about what he's doing. Here's my question. I wasn't aware, and I said the same thing on the comment line, and I was assured by some unpaid young intern that my comments would go directly to the office of the president. And if you believe that, I got some land here in Florida.
Well, it'll go to his office. Anyway, it won't go to him. But he'll get a tally sheet that says here's how many calls you got. I guarantee you that.
And one of the 3,000 was about the Marine Corps.
Exactly. No. I mean, they break them out into categories. I've seen these things.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. You understand rules of the Senate operations better than I do. I'm not so upset with Tuberville. He's a moron. I mean, it's just nothing you can say about him.
Yeah.
The thing I'm concerned about is our majority leader and our head of the military, our commander-in-chief. Why aren't they pressuring this committee? Here's the question. Does it require a 100% vote to forward out of committee a nomination for confirmation? I thought it only took a majority. Why is one man allowed to stop hundreds of officers over the last 2 months?
My understanding of this, Carl,
just vote him, put him in the corner.
My understanding of it, and I'm subject to correction here because I'm not an authority on Senate rules, and they can be very, very weird and intricate and complex and Byzantine even. But my understanding is that Tuberville is not doing that by denying a majority vote. He's doing that by asserting the right of a senator to basically shut things down, to shut the whole process down. Now, I don't know exactly how he does that. I don't, there's some technical way that he's doing that. But I do know that the technical way that he's using to do that has been used in the past for other things. And I don't think Schumer wants to give that power up. And he would have to amend the Senate rules to do away with that power. And the day may come when Republicans are in charge of the Senate when he wants to have that power, not to shut down military appointments, but to shut down some other toxic thing that might happen. And I believe that that's why you're not hearing Biden and Schumer calling for the Senate rules to be changed so that Tuberville has to do that. They're instead relying on pressure from his constituents and from the military to change his behavior. Pretty sure about that, Carl. I mean, like I said, double check it, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order. And, as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. And Scott in Columbus, Ohio, you wanted to correct me on the Wobblies? What did I get wrong?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Scott.
You mentioned, I've heard you say this before, the IWW. You call them the international workers of the world. They were the industrial workers of the world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I've been corrected before on that. And for some reason, it's like burned into my brain. Probably something I learned when I was 16 years old. Learned wrong, and it stuck with me. Just like I just got corrected over on Daily Kos by, saying that Jefferson had cut the size of the army from hundreds of thousands down to thousands, and there weren't hundreds of thousands in the army at that time. And somebody nailed me for it. And I'm grateful for those corrections. But sometimes stuff just gets stuck in your brain that's not right. So thank you, the industrial workers of the world.
That's right. We appreciate you so much. Have a great day, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Scott. Good to hear from you. Sammy in Imperial, Missouri. Hey, Sammy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to bring attention to this documentary called Atomic Homefront, which was, I think it's an HBO documentary from 2017. And I think you can watch it on YouTube now, but it's pretty terrifying. Have you heard of it?
I have not. Tell me about it.
Well, it's in the city, of course, it's like northwest of St. Louis. There was atomic uranium processing center for atomic bomb for the Manhattan Project. And there's a group of women, of moms called Moms STL, and they've been fighting this because there's kind of a cancer cluster, I guess you'd say. And now this waste has been in the Cold Water Creek system, so it's something to really check out.
Is this one of the forever chemicals, the PFASs?
It's uranium. It's from the
it's uranium. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I get it. These are the uranium tailings.
Yeah, well, and now I guess there's going to be an announcement in a couple of days. I live 30 miles south of it, but in this, I'm so upset about it. But anyway, so where they're actually storing this stuff is a waste removal place, and there's a fire now underneath. So it's been burning for years, and these women who live there, this whole community have been fighting this. I'm just trying to bring attention to everybody. I'm sorry I'm so upset about it because the documentary is very frightening, but now that it seems like the EPA, then I don't know. It's a super fun. Check it out, please. So, and I'll just.
Yeah, Trump tried to kill the Superfund. So what's the name of the documentary again?
It's called Atomic Homefront.
Atomic Homefront. Okay, thank you. I'll have to look for that. Sammy, thank you. Thanks for the tip
look
on
at it on YouTube. I don't know if it's on HBO anymore because I saw it on YouTube just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll do it. Thank you, Sammy.
Eric in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You were talking about nationalizing the oil companies. I just want to state it's as important for us to gain public control of the large, privately owned but publicly regulated utilities.
Absolutely agree with you.
I'll explain why. It'll take me about a minute, but let me explain why.
Okay.
In the state of California, recently, the Public Utilities Commission, with the tacit approval of Governor Newsom, approved a change in the compensation for rooftop solar to its users, reducing the compensation by 75%, which it's estimated will reduce the amount of new rooftop solar by about 50%, which will basically prevent California from meeting its climate change goals.
Right.
And there's a complicated reason why we think it actually happened. We're fighting against it.
But this is PG&E and the other for-profit utilities pushing this.
There are 3 large for-profit public utilities in California: PG&E and San Diego PG&E, whatever that is called. Their most recent attack is now going through the legislature, where there's a bill in the Assembly that will change it's a solar tax is what we call it.
Right.
Basically, we'll give a flat rate for all of the users of all the large public utilities and reduce the rate for the actual consumption, and the flat rate will be based on income. So what this will do is it will, number one, it will discourage people from getting rooftop solar because, of course, again, this is going to prevent them from getting the savings related to the amount of electricity
and this is their goal,
generating.
Of course.
But number two, it will encourage more use of electricity, which is going to be the electricity generated by their existing plants, which are fossil fuel generators.
Right.
So not only is it bad public policy, it's bad for climate change, it's bad for everything.
Right.
So I encourage the people in California to get involved in our campaign, to contact your legislators, contact your...
Is there a website, Eric?
The group that I'm working with is the Solar Rights Alliance, solarrightsalliance.com. And they have all the information that, to help get involved in this campaign.
Solarrightsalliance.com.
Yeah, the problem is that these large private companies do not want to voluntarily phase themselves out of business.
No, of course they don't. Of course they don't. And they want to increase their profits. Au contraire, right? To the opposite. Eric, thank you for the call. Wow, amazing stuff. All righty, we'll be picking up the conversation on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. Inflation is down, and the stock market was up. I haven't looked recently, but before we went on the air, it was up quite a bit because, hey, inflation is down, and that might mean that the Fed is going to stop or at least slow down cranking up their interest rate increases. University of Michigan professor of economics Justin Wolfer says, whoa, inflation is returning to normal rates. The chief economist at Moody Analytics, Mark, he says one couldn't ask for a better report on consumer price inflation. And he adds the Fed should rethink the need for more rate hikes. I agree. Keith Boykin, who is a journalist, author, and former Clinton White House aide, says, quote, I remember when Republicans predicted the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act would undermine the Fed's efforts and actually increase inflation. I remember that too. I remember the Inflation Reduction Act, that's a $1 trillion program. It's building stuff all over. It's a big green price. It's a giveaway. It's a big money. You're going to pour all this money. You're going to superheat and charge it. No, it's worked. It reduced inflation. The Inflation Reduction Act reduced inflation. Wednesday's report marks 12 straight months of declines in inflation. President Biden said that's Bidenomics in action. Now, the Fed has set 2% as the goal, so, they're going to continue to try to produce a recession. We'll see. We'll see. In the meantime, Joe Biden, the headline over at the Washington Post is Biden is quietly reversing Trump's sabotage of Obamacare. He's done a number of things. The two big ones have to do with tax credits and junk insurance. And let me explain. The junk insurance one first. There was a perceived need when people lose their jobs and can't afford COBRA, or COBRA's not available to them for whatever reason, lose their jobs and thus lose their health insurance, to have something that could last a couple of months, up to 3 months, that would tide them over until they got a real insurance policy or until they got on Medicaid or or Obamacare or whatever. And so as part of the Obamacare program that was rolled out in whatever year that was made law, I think it was 2009, there was this provision for insurance companies to sell basically unregulated policies that could only last 3 months. And the problem with these policies is that because they were essentially unregulated, or at least they were subject to the insurance regulations of the states, so they operated under the rules, the pre-Obamacare rules. But they weren't subject to the Obamacare rules, which meant that, and means that, with these short-term policies, that they can deny you care because you have a pre-existing condition. And in fact, it can be a pre-existing condition that has not been previously diagnosed. In other words, you get one of these junk insurance plans, and you show up at the doctor's office with a lump in your breast or a pain in your gut or whatever,
and they check you out and say, holy cow, you've got cancer, well, obviously that cancer didn't appear in the last 24 hours. In fact, it didn't appear in the last 3 months that you've had the insurance plan. It's been there for longer than that. And so they will say, oh, this is a pre-existing condition. We're not going to pay for any treatment at all. You're on your own, buddy. And then you're facing, hundreds of thousands of dollars for cancer surgery or radiation or chemo or, whatever path you take. And if you don't have the money, you get to die. So these policies are pretty bad. And like I said, they were purely designed as just transitional policies. So what did Trump do? He came along and he said, oh, well, you can have these policies for up to 4 years. Not 3 months, 4 years. And because you can buy them for an initial 1 year period and you can renew it for up to 3 years. And because these policies are such rip-offs, they're incredibly profitable. So people go to insurance agents and they say, I don't have insurance, I need a good insurance policy. And the insurance agent said, well, here, this is a policy. It's not only cheap, but I make a huge commission on it. And it's cheap because it's junk insurance. It's temporary insurance. They'll say, it's such a good deal, you can only buy it for 4 years. And so what's been going on ever since Trump legalized these things or extended them from 3 months to 4 years, what's been going on is that insurance brokers all around the country have been selling these things like there's no tomorrow. Literally millions of these policies have been sold to people who think they have insurance and will discover, they may be covered by a car accident. That's not a pre-existing condition. But when they show up with a brain tumor or prostate cancer, they're in deep trouble. So Biden has undone this. It was done by executive order. He undid it by executive order. He says these things are back to 3 months. They were intended to be transitional policies. They are going to be transitional policies once again. And on an emergency basis, they can be extended for another 30 days. That's the first thing he did. The second thing he did with these short duration plans, or the second thing he did had to do with the subsidy, essentially, for these programs. It was built into the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's called Enhanced Premium Tax Credits. So this is for people, low-income people, who want to buy an Obamacare plan, which is already subsidized, but really can't afford it. And this is a tax credit. Tax credit, unlike a tax deduction is where you get to reduce your taxable income by a certain amount, so it lowers your taxes. A tax credit is where the government actually gives you money or pays for something on your behalf, in this case, Obamacare. And these programs now, millions of Americans who, by the way, were probably previously on these junk short-term plans, millions of Americans now qualify to get solid health coverage, doesn't deny you because of pre-existing condition. It's not only very affordable, but in many cases has a premium of 0 because of the tax credits. There's a great piece about this over in the Washington Post. It's titled, Biden is quietly reversing Trump's sabotage of Obamacare. I wanted to flag it for you. Joe Biden has done just one hell of a lot of great stuff, and most of it gets no publicity whatsoever. In part because the Democrats are not particularly good at publicizing the good stuff they do, but in larger part because the media doesn't care. The media wants, James Comer is saying that, Biden took a bribe and he's got proof. That's the stuff the media wants. Or, oh my God, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert are having a fist fight on the floor of the House. That's what the media wants. They don't want a good news story. Hey, good news. Millions of Americans now have health insurance. Meanwhile, President Biden met with President Erdogan of Turkey in Latvia, or are they Lithuania? No, they're in Latvia, right? I always mix those two countries up. They're beautiful places. I've been to both. In any case, where they're having I think it's in Riga, but in any case, where they're having the NATO meeting. And Erdogan has been problematic. Erdogan refers to, or has referred to Putin as my dear friend.
And Putin has referred to him in similar language. Turkey has maintained cordial relations with Russia, even though Turkey is a member of NATO. But Erdogan increasingly, now that he's won his re-election, in a little sketchy process, but nonetheless, he's won his re-election. He's going to be around for a while. And, the question is, what are we going to do with this guy? He was holding up Sweden, in part because Putin didn't want Sweden to join NATO, and in part because there had been this burning of the Koran in Sweden that the Swedish government hadn't stopped. And it turns out the burning of the Koran was apparently by Turkish immigrants, which made it a big deal in Turkey, right? Made it a big news story. So nobody's really sure exactly why Erdogan completely changed his tune yesterday and this morning at the NATO conference. But he's now saying, yeah, let's invite Ukraine into NATO as soon as the war is over, but let's fast track it. He has endorsed lowering the membership requirements. Normally, you got to jump through all these hoops that take years and years and years, and he's saying, no, let's just fast track it. And nobody's really sure why. I think that there's a couple of reasons. And Erdogan, by the way, has done a number of things now, just very, very recently, to upset Putin. One is that he just announced that he's expanding a plant, a Turkish plant that manufactures what's called the Bayraktar TB2 medium altitude long endurance drone. It's made by a Turkish company called Baykar. This is the drone that Ukraine used to sink the Russian warship Moskova back in April of 2022 in the Black Sea. He's going to sell more of these things to Ukraine, which has Putin's panties in a wad. And then on the grain deals, he's working with Ukraine on the grain deals. So the question is, why is Erdogan suddenly singing the praises of NATO when before he was basically sabotaging NATO? I think Biden sat him down, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think Biden sat him down and said, you got two choices. You can either continue down the road with Putin and block NATO and Sweden, and the United States will have to reconsider our multiple interactions with you, our economic cooperation with you, our military cooperation with you, maybe even get you kicked out of NATO, and you'll be on your own and you'll be, in the Russian sphere. If that's where you want to be, good luck. Or we will actually increase our aid to you. This is the old carrot and stick approach, right? We will actually increase our aid to you, both military and economic, and we will argue in your favor to become a member of the European Union. Although we're not a member of the EU, we don't have any say in that, but we do have moral persuasion, shall we say. And my prediction is that when the histories are written, we're going to discover, Joe Biden's been doing foreign policy his whole entire life. He's been in the Senate since he was in his 20s. He was the youngest senator ever at the time, or at least at the time. And, he did foreign policy as vice president. This is his ballywick. This is what he's really good at. So good on him. And good on Erdogan, actually.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Something I never thought I'd say. He's not a good guy, but at least he's our not a good guy. We'll be back. And welcome back. Bob from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good to be back.
Thank you.
Hope you're doing well.
I am. I hope you are too.
I'm okay. Not so well, but life goes on while it does.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say one thing. Abolish the Supreme Court.
Why?
I think why? It doesn't need to exist. There's no Supreme. There's no Supreme.
Well, there's got to be some place where the buck stops. Are you saying that the appeals courts should be the final court of appeals?
All the courts underneath all the court systems should work. They shouldn't rely on some.
No, but I mean, if your neighbor sues you, Bob, and says that you're growing too much pot in your backyard, and you fight it and you lose, and you want to appeal it to an appeals court, you fight it and you lose. You want to take it to the Supreme Court. I mean, you want to have you want there to be a final court of appeals, don't you?
I don't want that issue to be under any court of law in the first place.
What, you just want to, if you don't like what your neighbor does, you just go out and shoot him?
I didn't say that. Did you say that?
Well, I'm trying to figure out if you're not going to use a judicial way of resolving conflict, the traditional way of resolving conflict that's non-judicial is violence.
Well, when the court system has become a representative of corporate violence in the first place and tyranny in the first place, not all court systems, not everybody involved, but, in regards to prohibition on cannabis, whereas we can't even talk about it as hemp, a crop that farmers would grow, or plants that would be used on stream banks and river banks and other areas to control erosion. Oh, my goodness, you couldn't put such a...
But hang on just a second here, Bob. You've wandered off topic here. Because it's not the court system that is made cannabis illegal. It's Congress. And, the court is simply reacting to laws Congress has passed. But I do agree with you that our court system has been corrupted. It's been corrupted by the Federalist Society. It's been corrupted by these right-wing billionaires. It's been, look at, there's a brand new scandal about Clarence Thomas. I'll be talking about it on the program tomorrow. This guy is probably the most paid-off jurist in America, in the history of America. Millions of dollars worth of bribes that Clarence Thomas has taken. And but that doesn't mean that you do away with the court system. It means that you reform it.
It's about Clarence Thomas. Maybe today it is. Yesterday it was about some other clown. Tomorrow it'll be about the next clown.
That's why you change the rules.
None of these people are supreme, and the lower courts should do their job. That's my point about what I want to say about, get rid of the Supreme Court altogether. So people do their work. Let's let farmers do their work. Prohibition wasn't just a war on hippies and black people. It was a war on farmers, small farmers in particular. And some of them might have been black, and some of them might have been hippies, and some of them might have been women, and some of them might have been gay. Yeah. That's the way it is.
You're talking marijuana prohibition or alcohol prohibition?
Prohibition on cannabis.
On cannabis. Okay, I get it. And that, and then that started out as a very racist thing. The whole reefer madness thing was about race. Bob, thanks for the call. Nice to hear from you again. 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it, and, went to school, and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour, and one last thing I wanted to share with you. James Comer, the guy running the House Oversight Committee, who was convinced that he had the source who was going to prove that Joe Biden took a bribe And that source turns out to be a Chinese spy who's running from the federal government right now because he's been indicted for illegal arms sales and for being a Chinese spy. And he was just, BSing Comer. I mean, he's a con man. But Comer has long represented a very, very conservative, very right-wing, very Christian part of Kentucky that does not like gambling. And so Comer, initially in his political career, was an opponent of gambling. And in fact, he voted against building 9 new casinos back in 2008. And then the gambling people started giving him some money. The CEO of the company that owns the legendary Kentucky Derby racetrack gave Comer the maximum contribution. Just a year later, Comer, this is from Sky Palma over on Raw Story, just a year later, Comer, who was trying to tie the Biden family to allegations of bribery, testified in favor of a constitutional amendment to build 7 new gambling facilities around Kentucky. Oh, yeah. Right. Also, Comer, when he was running for re-election, he loaned his own campaign $100,000. He wanted to get that money back, and so one of Kentucky's most influential men held a fundraiser at his Louisville home to retire Comer's debt. Who was this guy? Brett Hale, then the senior vice president at Churchill Downs. Guess what? That's horse racing. That's gambling. And the event eliminated Comer's outstanding debt. As Crew Litigation Counsel Stuart McPhail said, and I quote, "What you're seeing is a politician who is opposed to gambling ideologically, and money starts flowing to them before there's any apparent change in view, and lo and behold, their view starts to change. There's no speech to persuade anyone there. Money isn't buying ads or newspaper articles. Money's being used, at the very least, to buy influence." In other words, the gambling operations, wanted to build new casinos and everything in Kentucky. They didn't go for public opinion. They didn't go out and buy an ad in a local newspaper, in the Kentuckian or whatever it is. No, they bought James Comer. That's how you do it. Buy a member of Congress. They've been for sale since 2010 when the Supreme Court legalized political bribery. And James Comer is apparently right there with his hand out with the rest of the GOP and a pretty good-sized handful, sadly, of Democrats. We got to clean this up. We've got to end Citizens United. I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truths, Republicans on the House Oversight Committee would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back. Reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. "The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news." November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, Trump triumphs, and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft big lies, Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And Climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. All righty, let's get your calls here. Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, what's up?
Tom, you have inspired me to action today, to take action, when you called for the nationalization of the fossil fuel companies. I am going to start writing. Now, I don't have a computer because I can't see computer screens very well, but I write letters. I'm going to start writing to Democrats for the 2024 platform to put in the nationalization of the fossil fuel companies and I hope your viewers, other viewers, will start writing in. Jamie Harrison's the head of the Democratic Party, Amy Klobuchar, Ro Khanna. I write to all these people, and I'm going to start pushing now for that to be in the 2024 plan. Or, already I'm pushing them to put in biodegradable plastics. I pushed for that, and I talked with Mark Pocan on your program about that. Yep. Well, now it's a call to action that's inspired by you that we got to ask for not sometime in the future, but let's get it in the platform for 2024 to nationalize. Now, let me tell you this, too. Here in Lakeland, Florida, the city owns the city electric company. There is tremendous financial benefits. We have wonderful landscaping here in Lakeland because of the money that comes in from the electric company. There's a few independent cities around Florida. Mostly it's the big for-profit Florida Power and all that, but there's a few of us independent places, and it works.
Oh, yeah.
The Democrats can talk about lowering the taxes for working people instead of the Republicans lower the taxes for rich people.
Right. They can also lower the price of gas.
Yes.
Yeah.
It could lower all the benefits. So, Tom, you've inspired me, and I ask other viewers to start writing in, and let's lobby now to get this in the 2024 platform. So what do you think?
I think it's great. You have always been an activist, Keno, and I have such respect for you in that regard. Thank you so much for that, and yeah, go for it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, Keno. Good talking to you. Patrick in Pacifica, California. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. How are you?
Great. What's up?
Can you say I am doing my radio show today. My name is Pat Fahey. I'm Megatrends KXSF, and I'm using I'm using ChatGPT.ai as my guest to do a review of your book on the hidden history of healthcare.
Okay.
American healthcare.
Well, that should be entertaining. Have you hooked it up to a voice thing? Is that how you're doing it, or are you going to just read what it says?
I have this like British woman's voice, so it's non-threatening or
very cool.
Write something out.
That's fascinating, Patrick. What a great idea.
But I'm just trying. But anyway, I was wondering. So if you had. I guess I could read you some of the questions that I actually have for the show today, and it's but I had to kind of hack the algorithm because if I asked it directly to critique your book, to do a book report, it wouldn't do it. It sort of hedged.
It may not have access to the book online, because you have to buy the Kindle versions and Audible versions and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. But I had to hack the algorithm by asking questions of a factual, historical context, kind of like less directly and more,
Mm-hmm.
So I asked the question, for instance, 40 years of Reaganomics has shredded the U.S. economy that was fairly equal before Reagan's 83 reforms. The data compiled by the Pew Research said that the top 2% of America, top 2% own 60%, and now in 2020 it's 82%. You may remember this from your own book. And so I gave that kind of data, how Reaganomics has hurt the working class. So it really was remarkable. When I did it that way, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tax and fiscal policy, reevaluate tax structures. And number 2, strengthen workers' rights. Number 3, invest in education and skill training. 4, social safety net.
Wow. So ChatGPT has become a Thomas Piketty socialist.
I mean, it's really quite remarkable. So I've been doing that, for homeless policy, and also been interviewing NASA Ames research scientists in the age of James Webb Space Telescope. So I've been having these great conversations with astrobiologists and how James Webb has influenced their research at building 3 down at NASA Ames in their greenhouse lab and their Petri dish lab, where they can now take real-world data from JWST on, TRAPPIST-6, and 43 light years away. And this is the so they're setting that up this December, January.
That's fascinating stuff. Patrick, you're in the business. You know that I need to move along here now. but have you made your point?
Well, just have people listen to KXSF.FM. They want to hear more. And
there you go.
I wanted to ask you, are you using ChatGPT AI for
I have opened an account with it, and I went in and I said, write an article about immigration in the voice of Thom Hartmann. And it wrote an article that was, kind of milquetoast, but not bad. But the thing I concluded is that it ain't going to replace me. In fact, I'd even thought maybe I could take a vacation and have ChatGPT write a couple of days' worth of columns. It ain't going to work. It's not there yet.
You have to hack the algorithm a little bit.
Yeah, I've figured that out. You've got to ask basically leading questions by doing it. Patrick, I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and good luck with your show. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today? Tom, it's 2 questions I want to ask you. I've asked one question, then it's a statement I want to say. The question, if Donald Trump is convicted, can he still run for president now?
Yes, he can.
Convicted?
By law, he can.
Oh, by law, he can. But if he's put in prison, if he's put in prison,
he can still run for president. Back in the day, Eugene Debs was outspoken against World War I, and Woodrow Wilson had him arrested, and he was tried, and he was convicted, and he was sent to prison for basically being a war resistor. And he ran for president on the socialist ticket. This is the guy who's Bernie Sanders' hero, and I think he received like 1 million votes. I mean, he got a lot of votes. Or maybe it would be, 1 million votes in today's votes. The population's a lot larger now. But anyhow, he was a serious candidate. He wasn't, he didn't have a real chance, but he was a serious candidate, and he ran for jail from prison, or for president from prison. So yeah, Trump can do that.
And the other thing I want to say, you always talk about white nationals, but Tom, we had some black nationals too. I mean, self-hatred people. Now, Tom, I don't know. Are you familiar with Alan West and Jesse Lee Peterson? I know you're familiar with Alan West.
Yeah. Well, the black nationalist movement, Malcolm X was, labeled that. I don't know if it's an accurate label for him, but, it's been around for a while.
I'm talking about like Alan West or Jesse Lee Peterson, who
these are people who are just Republicans, aren't they? Really? Black Republicans?
Yes, but Alan West, he always hated Obama. And I don't know, do you know Jesse Lee Peterson, who have a broadcast also? Because he's the one who said if slavery was still going on, he'd be satisfied with it. He'd be okay with that. Jeez. And that's a black Republican.
Yeah, that's troubling. That's troubling, Tyler.
Yes. And one more thing, Tom, I want to pop myself on the back. I'm still rushing people to vote. And, Tom, I'm surprised I'm getting so many young women to vote now.
That's great, Tyrone. Keep it up.
Keep it up. We need more and more people voting. It should be, just automatic. In most developed countries, you are automatically registered to vote when you turn 18, period, and full stop. You don't have to jump through hoops. You don't have to fill anything out. It just happens. It should here, too. Tyrone, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 44 minutes, almost 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a second. Stay with us. And welcome back. Timothy in East Berkshire, Vermont. Hey, Timothy, how you doing with all the flooding there?
Yes. Howdy, Tom. Well, I know that you used to live in our the city of our state's capital, Montpelier.
Yeah, I used to live in Montpelier. I used to live in Northfield, and we lived in a little house on the hill there that overlooks Montpelier, and we looked right down onto Main Street, which is now, in 3 feet of water. The Winooski River just jumped its bank big time.
Right. The happiest citizens in Montpelier right now are mallard ducks.
Yeah, I get it.
And where I live here in East Berkshire, the Missisquoi is right in my backyard.
Yeah. Well, the last, when we were living there was a pretty bad flood in, I think it was 2000, 2001, maybe 98, whatever the year was. I think it was, and there were several houses that got washed away in one of the towns just south of Montpelier. And the city, there was a whole big debate about what to do, and the city ultimately decided to buy the house and the land. I mean, the house is no longer there, but buy the whole thing back from the people to make them whole. And
right.
But have any houses been washed away?
Right. Well, it's pretty severe. I mean, well, your three largest rivers in Vermont would be, respectively, would be the Missisquoi, and the Lamoille. And the Winooski and Lamoille got especially bad. Johnson, Vermont, which is just north of Montpelier, got hammered as well. But there was a press conference today, and Bernie was there. Peter Welch was there, and Congresswoman Ballant was there, and our governor, Phil Scott, who is a wonderful governor. Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
He's a Republican, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
And when it comes to national politics, I'm as mostly left as you can get.
Yeah.
But
no, Vermont's had a couple of good Republican governors. It keeps getting thrown that way because what's his name keeps running on the People's Party or whatever it's called, this third party, and so you get Republican governors with fewer than 50% of the vote because that party continues to run against both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Right, and it just doesn't do anything. It's like the Ralph Nader effect. I know you like Nader. I apologize. Don't take it personal.
I like Nader, but I don't like his running. It was a mistake for him to run in 2000 in Florida. He should not have run in swing states. He should have done it like David, what's his name, did when he ran in the Green Party in 2004 or 8, and just refused to even be on the ticket in the swing states.
Right. Well, I just wanted to give you a heads up because I know you used to live here, but FEMA's here immediately. They are now here. Actually, FEMA's been proactive.
Good.
And of course, Scott spoke with the president, and so anyway, the rivers have receded. And
things are getting better,
but it ain't over yet.
No, of course it's not. And by the way, this is, what's the sign that the climate revolution people are holding is this is the coolest summer of the rest of your life. Now, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, right.
Timothy, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you from Vermont. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. 11 minutes before the hour. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, Tom. This whole AI phobia thing, I think I've got it. And
okay.
I was walking by my bedroom, and Siri on my iPhone was talking to Alexa, and they were talking about Field Marshal Xenu. And
and the pigeons, the army of pigeons,
right, and they were full control of Agent Orange, who is in Florida.
Yeah, there you go, in Mar-a-Lago. Yep.
Right, but in regards to the nationalization of oil, that's great. That's a dream come true. But we're talking about legislators who are arguing over a poor family getting an extra loaf of bread.
I know.
You think they're going to allow that? I mean,
I don't think the Republicans would allow that. No, but I do think, and I do know, in fact, that if you want good policy, you need to start pushing for it long before it's possible. That is always how it happens. I mean, the women's movement was active from the foundation of this country and didn't get the vote until 1920. The anti-slavery movement, every major movement for any kind of progress forward starts when it's impossible. And right now, you're right, it's impossible to buy the fossil fuel industry, but it won't be impossible, I believe, it won't be impossible in January of 2025.
Right. But in New Jersey, we were the first state to ban assault rifles before the government was federal. And, Florio lost the governorship to Whitman over that. But it's hard to figure out, Tom. We have, some of the lowest crime in the country.
Yep.
And we pay the highest taxes.
Yep.
And we have some of the best living situations. Can you figure that out? With high taxes?
It makes perfect sense. People are supporting their communities. People are supporting their state.
Right.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm being facetious. I'm just saying that, it's not that hard to figure out.
Yeah, thank you.
But also, as far as the oil companies, I suggested the same thing to you, and you were against it, for the insurance companies to do like a jiu-jitsu move and put all their assets into hospitals or medical research or teaching hospitals and go that way. But I don't know how it would work with the oil companies. They have so much money.
Well, they do.
But
their stock is available in the open market. All you do is you just start buying their stock, and eventually you become you don't typically you don't even need to own a majority of the stock. You just need to own a sizable minority to basically have enough voting power that you can control a board of directors.
Right. There's another important component that they don't dominate the solar sector and do the same thing and kick all the smaller.
If we bought them up, I think they should start getting into the solar. They should be reinvented as power companies rather than as fossil fuel
I don't want
companies.
them to dominate it.
Well,
I want there to be some control over them, not like they are now.
Yeah, no, I get it. And you'd want to do it. I mean, you and I are talking now about, the fine details of a much larger thing. We need to get the larger thing done first. Bill, nice to hear from you. Thank you. And that was a good one. Alexa talking to Siri. What happens when those two get together? Randall in Seattle. Hey, Randall, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. I want to talk about Russia.
Yeah.
I think they are in cahoots with China, and I think Korea will back them up. Maybe the Third World War.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering your thoughts on that.
I think that Putin has been trying to build an alliance with President Xi of China, and it looks to me like over the last year that's increasingly falling apart because of Ukraine. Xi has been backing off Putin, and now Xi's got his own problems. The Chinese economy is not recovering. as well as many of the other economies of the world, and in large part because they've got an enormous amount of debt, and they overbuilt during the boom times. These 5-year plans, it turns out, they might be good for some things, but they're not necessarily good to run an economy. And we'll see how many American companies continue to operate there. But I think long term, there's an axis of dictators around the world. And it's not just Russia, China, and North Korea. There's probably, about 100 countries that would jump into that club with enthusiasm if there was a dictator's version of NATO, say, as a sort of a mutual defense pact. The problem is none of them can trust each other, because you just can't trust a dictatorship. It all depends on the whims of one person, and that one person is subject to being overthrown or to dying in office or whatever, and that's why you're not seeing that. Randall, thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. Wow, that was a powerful and scary talking point. This summer will be the coolest summer for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, it's true, though.
Yeah. Tell Kino that I'm with him, and after listening to him for many, many months and several years now, he's grown on me, and I wish we could build up at least 20% of the voting bloc of the Republicans to be like his mindset, and we would never have had Donald Trump or Moonves saying, we should capitalize on people like that, because people wouldn't be susceptible to being monopolized like him.
Yeah.
But here's my question.
For people who don't know what you're talking about, by the way, when Kino first started calling into this program many years ago, he was a Republican. And then he started the Bull Moose, I think, Republicans. He kind of wanted to reinvent Teddy Roosevelt, because Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive Republican. And then I think, I can't speak for Kino, but he's a good guy. I think he finally just gave up on the Republican
His heart is in the right place.
Yeah. So anyhow, Pearson, we've only got about 30 seconds left. You got a quick one?
Yeah. When you mentioned a half hour ago about the tax credits, will that apply for people in red states like Texas, where our governor has refused to expand Medicaid? Will that prevent us from our citizens who can't get care to access it?
I don't think so, because it's about Obamacare, and I don't think that the governors have that much say over Obamacare. They do have control over the Medicaid. You're absolutely right, but I'm not sure, Pearson. So you should look it up. I'm sure if you were to. Well, it should be Googleable, and if all else fails, call your member of Congress and ask them about these tax credits for Obamacare policies. I got to run. Pearson, thanks for the call. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!